So I'm just trying to mimic nature in order to return it to the glory that it was.
Welcome to the 274th installment of Ear to the Ground, the Land Stewardship Project's podcast on family farming, regenerative agriculture, regional food systems, and local democracy. I'm Brian DeVore, editor of the Land Stewardship Letter. I recently spent several minutes on a blustery spring evening watching water slowly soak into hard, crusted soil that had been newly planted as soybeans in a northeastern Iowa farm field. Or rather, I should say I watched it not soak in. After some 25 minutes of staring at the moisture, pooled in a 6-inch diameter steel ring that had been pounded into the soil as part of an infiltration test, I and members of the Land Stewardship Project's soil health team gave up and walked away. That's bad news. Poor water infiltration erodes soil and robs plants of the moisture they need to thrive. It's a sign of a compacted, unhealthy soil biome. The inability of that 19-acre field to soak up a little moisture was particularly striking, given that just minutes before we had conducted the same infiltration test 100 feet away and experienced dramatically different results. In that case, it took just a few minutes for the equivalent of a 1-inch rainfall to disappear into the ground. That's because the soil was not bare and exposed. It was covered in a lush, 4-way mix of cover crops, which were protecting the soil from pounding rains while breaking up compaction with deep root systems. While a 25-head cow-calf herd rotationally grazed the cover crop mix nearby, Scott Holthouse, the farmer who planted those covers, said simply, "That's why I'm doing what I'm doing." Scott and his wife, Amanda, recently hosted an LSP pasture walk where they demonstrated how they're utilizing the grazing of cover crops to transition into perennial pasture, a 12-acre field that's been growing corn and soybeans for the past 40 years. In the fall of 2021, they no-till seeded a 4-way mix of rye, triticale, barley, and hairy vetch on those highly erodible acres. The mix overwintered, and the Holthouses started grazing it in mid-May. When I visited the farm soon after the cattle started grazing this spring, the bright green of that verdant mix of covers popped in contrast to the drab browns of all those bare fields in the area that had been tilled up for the planting of corn and soybeans. The Holthouses' plan is to rotationally graze the cover crop mix a couple times this summer and then plant more grazing covers later in the growing season. The goal is to not only provide cheap forage for the cattle herd, but to build the soil's biology to the point where it will make a good home for a perennial pasture. While Scott concedes that he's just getting started in building this field's soil health, he's excited to already see reduced erosion and better water infiltration on those acres. Grazing the covers also takes pressure off the permanent pastures that are present on the farm. The Holthouses, who operate their Oak Creek Pastures enterprise on Scott's family's land, hope next year to start a similar transition process on that 19 acres of soybean ground that's having problems soaking up moisture. It's part of their overall strategy to create a livestock production enterprise based on perennial, grass-based systems that builds healthy soil and cycle water efficiently. They're already direct marketing beef, pork, broilers, and eggs raised using adaptive rotational grazing and other regenerative methods. I recently chatted with Scott about his transition of crop ground to perennial grass and the key role building soil health plays in Oak Creek Pasture's future. He started out describing the history of that 12-acre field and what they've been doing to bring it back to life.
Yeah, it's one of our more highly erodible fields on the farm. The upper part of the field that's not as steep has been row crop for as long as my dad can remember. The lower part was actually hog pasture up until 1980 when the hogs left the operation and then they tore out the fence and put it all into row crop. Generally with an oat, hay, corn rotation. Been in crop for the last 40 years.
And so it was kind of showing the effects, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think, there's a better way to, stop the erosion on the highly erodible land, and that's by stopping tillage and actually getting back into a perennial system.
So, take us a little bit through that more recent history, and it kind of started last fall.
Yeah, so last year it was corn, just conventional management, I guess. Probably had a GMO-type corn, sprayed, fertilized, everything. The corn was harvested right around the 1st or the 5th of October last year, and on the 12th of October I went in with a no-till drill right into the corn stubble, and I seeded rye, winter trit, winter barley and hairy vetch.
And is there a particular reason you picked that kind of a mix, that particular mix?
I'm trying to get my maturities spread out so I have a larger harvest window was the biggest reason. Obviously, the vetch was to add some nitrogen fixation to the mix, and it's definitely doing that. I only put 4 pounds of vetch down, but there's quite evident. There's a good catch of it, I would say, of the 4 pounds, and you find them readily, and they were inoculated with rhizobia bacteria, and definitely are capturing nitrogen because of the nodulation that you see on the roots.
Yeah, I think you'd explained that before, and I think that's really interesting. Is you did that mix because so that maybe when one species is starting to go by the wayside a little bit as the season advances, maybe another one can come in, and then you still, like you said, it kind of extends that grazing season throughout the growing season a little bit more.
Yeah, it's just for my spring, grazing crop before I get onto my perennial pastures and stuff. But yeah, that's I think spreading your risk out more or less is good. And it's also good to have diversity, and maybe you have different winters, and the same area will have a different winter 3 years in a row, and you don't know which variety could possibly overwinter the best. And so that's another reason to, more or less, it's an insurance policy. If one variety, obviously rye is probably the hardiest of all of them and stuff, but I'm pretty sure that we have a lot of trit coming through in our mix too. And the winter barley, I can't really tell which one is the winter barley until it matures more, that I can get a better idea on it, and by then it's probably all going to be grazed off, so the verdict is still out on that.
You talk a little bit more about, so you're going to graze it one more time, try to get another grazing out of it, and then what's the plan? Like, when would you maybe graze it another time, and then what would be the plan later in the growing? What would you come in there with after that?
So my intention is to probably graze it here, starting in the next 2 weeks or so. Come back in and just do a final graze on it, depending on what the regrowth looks like and stuff. So we had quite a bit of regrowth on what we grazed 2 weeks ago there, and it's looking. I actually locked them off. We had a pretty good shot of rain here midweek last week, and I took them off of the field because it was just getting pugged up too much and stuff that I didn't feel like I wanted to waste that much feed, and so I took them and put them on perennial pasture for a couple of days, and then I got them back out there now just to solve that issue, I guess. I would say we're going to get maybe a foot of regrowth on a lot of it, and so it'd probably be a quicker graze the second time across it, but then we'll come back with a sorghum Sudan base of a mix, probably with some cowpeas and pearl millet and sunflowers and okra, possibly some sort of clover. I might just use a medium red clover, so I have a perennial clover that'll come back in the spring that I can either have a grazing crop then, or it can companion a small grain crop that I would grow. So that planting would be later in June here. So
okay.
I would say within the next 3 weeks I'll be getting that seeded, hopefully to get to grazing by the 1st of August, between the 1st and the 15th of August. More than likely at this point, we probably won't try for a fall grazing crop. If it'd been 3 weeks earlier, we'd probably plant like an oat turnip pea mix after we graze some of that sorghum Sudan off that way. But I think this year a lot of it's going to just stay into, go back into a rye or trit type cereal grain for the winter that I can utilize in the spring. I don't know yet what the plan is, but peas, I guess peas or barley, possibly harvest some grain for my chickens or pigs type of deal. It'll all depend on what the fall is like and what the grazing year turns out to be, I guess.
So maybe 3 grazings this year, if that works out?
I'm hoping that we can get 3 times across it, possibly even 4. We'll see if I do a quick graze on sorghum and pearl millet and then let it utilize, more let it go the rest of the year to get a long fall graze off of it. So hit it light the first time and then come back in the fall and strip graze it off that way.
So what's your movement like? Do you move the cattle daily, or what kind of setup are you doing with that?
Yep, we're moving cattle daily. We got a water line right down the center of the field, and we move a little 50-gallon stock tank right along with them. It's got a float on it and everything, and I'm just using poly wires for cross fences and whatnot. We got a high tensile wire for the perimeter, and down the center of the field is all high tensile wire as well, and we just pull poly wires off of that. Just got the field split the long way in half, so we grazed down the top side, and now we're on the bottom side grazing back. So right now we're running approximately 150 feet by 250 feet is the approximate amount of daily graze, I guess, that we're doing. And I guess I just adjust. I got posts every 30 feet on the center fence, and so I just count 5 posts and go across to my lower fence. And if I feel like they chewed it off too well, then I'll give them another post, and if I don't feel like they're utilizing enough of it, I cut a post back, so it's pretty easy to adjust, and, generally adjusting in a 30-foot by 200 or 250-foot increment.
What kind of really fascinated me about what you're doing here is you're not only doing this to get that short-term feed value, and get the cattle through the season and all that, but you have some long-term plans too, in that you're really trying to build that long-term soil health using the combination of the cattle and the cover crops with this field. And then it sounds like you have some longer-term plans for that field as well.
Yeah, I think, in the future, I'm going to take the lower part of the field and probably go back and do some sort of a tall fescue type base of a perennial pasture system. And then on the upper part of the field, I'd like to try eastern gamma grass as a summer perennial warm season grass that I can utilize, in the early summer and stuff. And that's kind of my hope, is to get it into a perennial grazing system and have more options for grass, stockpile fescue. I don't believe that our pastures that we have now have a lot of fescue in them, and I just see the value in that stockpiled forage, or the value in stockpiling fescue for either winter grazing or even early spring grazing that way. So that's where I'm trying to get some fescue into the rotation, I guess, more or less, so that I can utilize that better in the future.
Yeah, and it sounds like your strategy, this was like you said, it was in crops for 40 years. Didn't exactly build the soil biology during that time. So this is a good way to kind of, for you to economically, because you still have to get economic return on that, to build that, to kind of be a bridge, that transition between the row crop years and the kind of the zero biology or very little biology and organic matter, and then kind of so that when you do put in that perennial pasture, it will it's gonna the biology is gonna be there for it to maybe really take off and be of value for you.
Yeah, that's correct. That's I'm just trying to get the nutrient cycle and the water cycle and just to cover, start capturing carbon on a daily basis rather than on, a 3-month annual basis and stuff. And that's kind of where my goal is to, get the soil health through keeping that living plant on the soil as long as we can, and then not minimizing my disturbance, obviously, and not tilling the soil and using no-till methods in order to plant my seeds, what I'm growing as my annual crops, and eventually I'll no-till, a perennial pasture mix into that, and then the only thing after that will be our grazing management, I guess, is to what we get and how we harvest it, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I suppose it's a good way to practice your grazing management too.
Correct. You'll know if the cows will let you know if they need more or if they need less, or I mean, it's good to see the cattle enjoying themselves, and that's, yeah, there's just nothing more peaceful and calming than watching cattle graze.
Part of this is also to take pressure off you do have some permanent perennial pasture. I don't know, how many acres do you have in that pasture?
We have approximately 20 acres of permanent pasture. It's doing well. I guess it's been under, my adaptive management here the last year, and you can really see this year the impact that's having, and it comes back to my management last fall in getting the cattle off of there before they overgrazed it, and then letting that thing have a good 45-day rest period before it froze. There's a lot more growth than I had last year on most of it. We did do some bale grazing on some of it too, so that's probably a given. I'm really happy with how a lot of it's responding to that practice. I think that's only going to get better in those areas, but just it's lusher, it's taller, it's thicker. It just looks a lot healthier than it did even a year ago, and I credit a lot of that to that 45-day rest before it froze last fall. And then I, grazed that stockpile off after that before I started bale grazing. Feeding that little bit extra hay last fall is gonna give me a lot more pasture this summer and stuff. So it's a savings account that you are building when you can, and then you're withdrawing from that account once you get to where you want to be. Well, I bale grazed two different ways last winter. The first way I bale grazed is I put, on one pasture I chose a particular paddock that I had, or strip in my grazing system that I fed hay bales on. So last November I put out 25 hay bales on that pasture, and then I gave them just 2 bales at a time. I used bale rings and then just electric polywire in order to fence off 2 bales, and then they'd eat them 2 bales. And after they ate the 2 bales, if there was anything left, I just took a pitchfork out there and spread it out into areas that didn't have the impact on them from where the cows were and stuff. And so you fill in the bare spots more or less in between the bales that didn't get the effect of the manure or the effect of the bale and stuff. But then I also, on another paddock, I just fed 2 bales at a time and moved across that paddock that way. So I would feed generally every week. I fed a bale or 2 bales every week to the cattle I had, and then when they needed 2 more bales, I just feed them 2 more, and I just moved the rings to a new spot every time that I was feeding. But that particular field was a little bit wetter and stuff, and there's no way to apply manure or anything to that field in the summertime. It's not, the only time you could ever get in there is when it's froze in the wintertime, and that's why I utilized that particular piece the way I did to bring nutrients onto it in the wintertime. Bar none, there's no cheaper way to increase fertility on land than with bale grazing. For one thing, you got the nutrients that's tied up in that hay that you're probably concentrating more or less on that particular acre of land. So I buy all my hay, so I imported all the nutrients from somebody else's farm. There's no more efficient way to spread manure and utilize those nutrients and keep your cost of production down, a profitable level, I guess, and definitely is a lot better, I feel, for the environment. You're not utilizing a lot of diesel fuel in order to haul that manure back out, and I think you capture a lot more of the nutrient value of your manure as well.
Well, and going back to that 12-acre field with the cover crops that you've been grazing, this seems like a really good way to, you said you really feel like that permanent pasture's coming along because you were able to give a longer rest period and the bale grazing and that, but also you were able to take pressure off it this spring where you may have been tempted to get the cattle out there and, maybe it's too wet or whatever, but it sounds like this 12-acre cover crop fields was a really good way to bring that pasture along a little bit more so and get some recovery and not put so much pressure on it early in the season.
Obviously front loaded with a lot of forage this spring, but by midsummer we'll be looking for some more forage, I believe, and hopefully the sorghum Sudan Pro millets are ready for light grazing by then, so I can give the perennial pasture a good rest again before I come back onto them, for a second grazing. But
Soil health is such a key part of this. I know this is very early in the process. You just started this transition to this field last fall, basically. But we were out there 10 days ago or so and did a water infiltration test. And, I know it's probably not where you want it to be eventually, but then we compared it to a field across the way there that I think had just been planted to soybeans, and it's pretty crusted ground and all of that. And yours, the water did infiltrate after several minutes, but that one across the driveway that was in the soybean and all crusted over and looking pretty hard, I think it was 25 minutes, and then we finally pulled the ring because we got tired of waiting around. So that's really, to me, shows the potential there. If you're already getting that kind of infiltration, that there's a lot of potential there.
yeah, I believe we can. I think it was 7 minutes it took to infiltrate an inch of water on this no-tilled, cover crop field that we had, and just 100 feet away in that conventional tilled soybean field. I think it would have took 2 hours plus to infiltrate that same inch of water. At the rate that it was going. This shows that what we're doing by not disturbing the soil is improving the water cycle, and capturing all that rain that's so very crucial to everything that grows on it and lives in it and stuff. And I definitely feel like we're moving in the right direction. I think after a good sorghum Sudan, base cover crop this summer, I think there'll be even greater improvements in that. So,
Even though it's early in the process, so you're noticing any other soil health benefits on that 12 acres there since you've kind of started integrating the cover crops and the livestock?
I definitely think there's more wildlife on that comparative. I mean, you see a lot of birds. There's a lot of birds that are utilizing that field, I assume, for their, the insects are a lot greater on that field because I haven't used any synthetic fertilizer or any chemicals or anything in my management of this land. I guess the only input I put on was probably 2 ton of pack manure I spread per acre back in December, but that was all I've done to the fertility side of this field. But no, I think you see a lot of earthworms when you do see earthworms when you're digging in it. For sure is a good sign that there's a lot of diversity within the soil system too, because they got to have food to eat or they wouldn't be there as well. But just keeping it covered, I think, and having a plant that's capturing sunlight, and having the worms there, the insects there, in order to help with your water infiltration and help with your diversity within the system is, I don't think a guy could ask for much more than that. I mean, just it's nice to go out and hear a lot of birds chirping and singing and doing all their happy dances. So
It feels like the land's kind of coming back to life a little bit.
I would definitely agree. When I'm surrounded by corn and soybean fields, it's a good place for wildlife. No, I'm definitely proud of what I'm doing, I guess, and it comes down to following the soil health principles, and that's keeping a living root on that soil, minimizing your disturbance, integrating your livestock, not using your chemicals and synthetic fertilizers and different things. But most definitely, I've learned that the driving factors in soil health are capturing sunlight and infiltrating water, and that's where I'm focusing my attention. on doing those two things. At the most basic principle, is just focusing on those two things, and whatever you do, and you just got to realize that there's cause and effects for everything that you do, and either what you're doing is causing positive effect or a negative effect, and I choose to try to skew things towards the positive side of things, and not do things that have negative effects on the soil. Nature's a very resilient thing, and if you farm in God's eyes or nature's eyes, you'll get rewarded.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
You don't have access to a lot of equipment and a lot of capital, and you work a full-time off the farm job, so time is limited. You have to save money, you have to save labor, so that's a big part of what you're doing here, is trying to use minimal, cut costs, but not do it in a way that's going to cost you in the long term. But you don't have an endless supply of capital and time to devote to this kind of transition.
No, we don't have it. So I think the quickest way to regenerate soil health is with livestock, and in particular a cow. I mean, it just mimics the way that the buffalo grazed the prairie, which this land would have been 400 years ago or 200 years ago, maybe even. So I'm just trying to mimic nature in order to return it to the glory that it was.
For more information on grazing and soil health, including a link to an LSP video showing how to conduct a simple water infiltration test, see the podcast page for Ear to the Ground episode 274 at landstewardshipproject.org. If you have comments or suggestions about this podcast, contact Brian DeVore at bdevore@landstewardshipproject.org, or you can call 612-816-9342. By the way, it helps us greatly if you can give Ear to the Ground a rating on iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever podcast platform you utilize. Thanks to Laura Borgendale, a Western Minnesota musician, for Ear to the Ground's theme music. And a special thank you to all of Land Stewardship Project's members who make initiatives such as this podcast possible. If you're not a member, visit landstewardshipproject.org to learn how you can support LSP. Thanks for listening.